Okay guys, this is example of graphing polar functions. So remember that we always have like r is a function of theta. And what you could do is you can make a chart. Chart's kind of tough though, where you're picking values and then plotting them. Picking values for theta and then plotting them, which we could do as well, but I want to show you a little trick. Like, let's go back to trig graphing, okay? So if you remember, I'm going to go pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi to start, okay? And let's say this is our graph. We're going to just do 2 plus cosine theta, and let's just go back to the trig as if it was 2 plus cosine x. So hopefully you guys remember. Okay, if let's do purple. Okay, so if cosine 0, right, if you're plugging in 0 for cosine, you get 1, so that should be 3. If you plug in pi over 4, right, you would get 2 plus root 2 over 2. So you know what I'm going to do? Let's get rid of that real quick. And let's do a little bit higher up. So let's go so this would be 1, this would be 2, and this would be 3. Just so we have a little more room. And if you're going to plot, so again, plugging in 0, you get 2 plus 1 or 3. Plugging in pi over 4, you would get 2 plus root 2 over 2. So let's put that approximately here. All right, I'll just write that in. 2 plus root 2 over 2, like that. And then pi over 2 would be 0, so you would get that value there, 2. Like 2 plus 0 gives you 2. And then 3 pi over 4 would be negative root 2 over 2 for cosine, so 2 minus root 2 over 2. So let's put that right about there, 2 minus root 2 over 2. And then if we plugged in pi, we would get 0. My bad. We would get negative 1. So that would give us positive 1. So you would have this set up here. Okay? I mean, if you want to use a table, it's fine, where you're picking values for theta, and you get values for r, which in this case we would get 0, would give us 3, pi over 4, 2 plus root 2 over 2, pi over 2 gives us 2, 3 pi over 2 gives 3 pi over 4 gives us 2 minus root 2 over 2, and then pi is going to give us just 1, right? So pi is just going to give us 1. All right, and then remember, it does repeat itself, so it's going to go back up. But if this was a graph on a rectangular, you would have it like that, and then you guys know that it would continue on that way. Same thing here, continue down. My curve is a little crooked, but you get the idea. Now, this is only on rectangular right now. We want to graph this as a polar, but let's use what we have. So using either the table, you use either the table, or you use the graph that I just drew. And now, remember, it's angles and radius. So 0 degrees, or 0 radians, I should say. And then we know we would get 3. So let's mark it like this. 1, 2, 3. So 0 radian, 3 is my radius. So that's my first point. Next point is going to be at pi over 4. So remember, pi over 4 right in between, right? And one thing that we could do is think of these as circles, right? So right, it goes around like that. Goes around like that. Okay. And if we're plugging in pi over 4, we get 2 plus root 2 over 2. So not quite 2, not quite 3. So it's in between, right, the values of 2 and 3. So I'm going to plot my point in between 2 and 3, like that. Okay. The next one we have is pi over 2. So we did these two. Pi over 2 is giving me 2. So this was pi over 4. This is pi over 2. And it's giving me 2. So we're having that value right there. Remember, that's 1 and that's 2. And then now we have 3 pi over 4, which is like that. And we get 2 minus root 2 over 2. So that's going to be in between 2 and 1. So I'm putting a point right here. And then the last one I have is pi, which would give me 1. So remember how your unit circle works, right? You have 0 radian, you have pi over 4 would be here, pi over 2 would be here, 3 pi over 4, and then pi, okay? So right now, our graph just try your best to draw the curve the way it is. So it's going to look like that so far. Yeah. Right. Not bad. So it looks like that so far. Okay. Now, let's continue this, but it's going to repeat itself. So if you have, say, 5 pi over 4, it's going to wind up being it's going to wind up being as if it was, 3 pi over 4, but we're at 5 pi over 4. So it just continues because you're getting the same values. It's like a symmetric property over the x-axis for cosine. So here you would get, what do we have, between 2 and 1, right? So you have a point here. Then it went back up to 2, so I'm going backwards on the table or backwards on the graph, goes back up to 2. Then between 2 and 3, right, so if you continue your line there, between 2 and 3, and then back to 3. Okay, so you have another portion of your curve looks like this. And that's the graph of r equals 2 plus cosine theta. All right, so when you're graphing, right, remember you might want to go back to rectangular or a table, and you could continue your table